Going down. Ding, 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 ding. And they could roll the ore carts on there, lock them in. Ding, 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 ring the bell, up and down it goes. It's an outhouse. And why did they put it on the side of the house instead of away from the house, which is what I would have done, is because the winters here are so brutal, you don't dare go outside to go to the bathroom. You'll freeze to death out there. And they got old Coke bottles in here. Look at that. And they got, oh look, there's a stove. There's an old stove in there. There's a bed over there, and there's a bed, there's an old brass frame right there. Ooh, you imagine staying the night in here? Giving me the shivers. Yeah, let me think. How to rebuild the country, yes. They had two fires here at Bodie. They had one in the late 1800s, and then again in the 1930s, early 1930s. The last fire, of course, did the most damage. And this whole section down here, yeah, it looks like an empty field. That was full of houses and businesses and hotels and saloons. Well, of course, the fire that came through here in the early 30s wiped most of that out. So now you're just seeing a small fraction of what they used to have back then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through and explain what's left and why it's built the way it is.
By the end of 1879, over 10,000 people live in Bodie. They come from all over California, from Nevada, and from other places in the West. There is traffic in the streets all day and night. There are trains of huge white-topped prairie schooners bringing freight from the railroad. There are hay wagons, lumber wagons, and prospecting outfits. The people of Bodie are extremely social. The favorite holiday is the 4th of July. Everyone has a good time. Most of Bodie's men are single, but there are more wives and children than one would expect to find in such a place. One thing Bodie doesn't have is wood. Wood is everything.
Look at that. Is that a view or what? That whole area is just filled with buildings. There's the old firehouse. Ironically, it never burned. This is Main Street right here. There's a portion of it down there, what's left of it. And of course all this was burned out during the last fire in the early 30s. And they said it was created by a little boy playing with matches. I don't know if that's true. Look at these old schools. You don't see this anymore. And Bodie had a saying. Every morning they'd wake up and say,
"Do we have a man for breakfast?"
One Joseph DeRoche, angry at the husband of a woman he had been romantically involved with, shot and murdered him in cold blood at the corner of Main and Low Streets.
Bodie Free Press. Between 1:30 and 2 o'clock Monday morning, a long line of masked men were seen to file out of a side street into Bonanza Avenue. There must have been 200 of them. Amid loud cries of "DeRoche, bring him out and hurry up," Jailer Kurgan appeared and said, "All right, boys, give me a little time." DeRoche's head was bare, and as the bright rays of the moon glanced upon his face, there was a picture of horror visible. He was hurried up a back street to Fuller. The corner of Green was turned, and a halt was made. In front of this place was a huge gallows frame. "Move it over to the spot where the murder was committed," was the order. And a dozen men carried it to the corner of Main and Low Streets. DeRoche was asked by the leader if he had anything to say. He replied, "No, nothing." "Pull him," was the order, and in a twinkling the body rose 3 feet from the ground. While the body was still hanging, a paper was pinned onto his breast bearing the following inscription: "All others take warning. Let no one cut him down. Bodie 601.
Used to shoot a man every day here. William Bodie, of course his name was spelled B-O-D-E-Y and they changed it to B-O-D-I-E. William Bodie and a man named Black Taylor, actually it was 4 gentlemen. They came down here and they were staying the night, and up by the cemetery they were doing some sampling. They found some gold. Well, the problem was winter was coming and it gets real cold up here, real cold. So 2 of the men, they left and they went to another town over there by Bridgeport. William and his friend decided to stay. Why? Because it's gold, that's why. And so what they did is they thought, well, we could just last the winter here. Fate had it they couldn't last the winter. You know how cold it gets up here?
The winter of 1878 takes hundreds of lives from exposure and disease.
So what happened was they tried to go back town over by Bridgeport to get supplies, and they get into a blizzard on the way back. William Bodie never made it. Why? He broke his leg and froze to death. And the rest is history. His friend came back, and of course they found placer gold up by the cemetery. Now you got to remember, the placer gold out here, it's not the kind of gold you're thinking of. It's not that super buttery rich gold that you're thinking of like in California. This whole area is sitting on top of volcanic vents. A whole bunch of andesite in here, porphyry andesite. The gold has got a lot of silver in it, at least 30%. It's called electrum. And some of that gold, it don't look like gold. It looks kind of like white gold. It's heavy, but it's kind of a whitish color. And so the gold wasn't that rich. It wasn't as rich as they were hoping, but it was rich enough for them to get up on those hills and start digging like gophers. Ooh, I gotta be quiet because I don't want to wake up the dead. That's the standard on the hill. Now, there was a mill there before that one, and of course it burned down like everything else in the Old West. It's prone to fires. Bodie originally wasn't that big of a deal. Matter of fact, it was considered a bust by most miners back then. When they were tunneling up on the hill there was a cave in. That's right. And when it caved in, it opened up this beautiful ledge of gold. It was so rich and so fabulous, it drew in investors and people all over the United States and around the world. Oh man, and they started tunneling hard. But you remember, these are what? These are epithermal deposits. So you know they're gonna pinch out because they're shallow veins. Matter of fact, that one went down 1,280 feet. There's nothing down there. Tell you what, a healthy man goes down and a broken man comes up. You can see the old sidewalk out here. See that? That's right. You can see it going all the way along through here. There's the old sidewalk right there. And you can see they got a safe in there. Imagine how much gold bars used to sit in there and all the stocks. Whoo, man, I'll tell you what. And also, you know what? Before I get too far along, I wanted to recognize all the clampers. If you don't know what that is, you're going to have to look it up. They help keep this place preserved because a lot of people could have tore it down, but they didn't. The geology here is they had porphyry andesite here, which is intermediate volcanic rock. And they also had rhyolite here. And rhyolite's also a volcanic rock. It's a felsic extrusive rock. And the veins here are fissure-filled veins. The gold is inside those coarse fissure-filled veins. I know, that's a mouthful, huh? When they found the gold down over there by the cemetery, they worked it up here under the hill. See that? And what they do, they find those small little stringers. Now, they did find other things in there. They had sulfides mixed in, but not a lot. That's the neat thing about it. It was mostly free mill gold. And then they got up on the hill there, you can see where they were going through the country rock to get down to those quartz veins and followed them. But the problem with epithermal deposits, they're shallow in nature. The veins pinched out at 1,280 feet. They should have known that going in. Anyway, we're in a section that's on this side of the Sierras, and a lot of this area has been stretched apart, and you have a lot of volcanoes in the area. That's why we have this andesite flow here. When you have that, you're gonna have a lot of hot acidic waters, brine solutions, hydrothermal fluids coming up, and it's gonna bring a lot of that gold and silver with it. And as it comes through in that solution, it's gonna solidify inside of what? Those fractures, faults, and fissures. So they call it a fissure-filled vein. Now usually when you're working with that type of material, the gold and the silver has a high concentration rate with the gold, and it'll actually come out of solution with the gold. And that's why the gold will have more of a white color to it. And of course it won't be as valuable because it has a high percentage of silver in it. Almost 30 to 40% out here. All right, see that? That ugly looking volcanic extrusive rock? Well, that's called andesite. Comes in different colors. This one just happens to be gray. If it's got large crystalline structures in it, it would be called porphyry andesite or andesite porphyry. And there's tons of it here. This is rhyolite. Sometimes people get that mixed up with what? Ash flow tuff or brecciated tuff. But that's rhyolite. You got dikes and dikes of this stuff around here. And then you have what? Quartz. This is quartz. Of course, you all know what that looks like. You get a whole bunch of hydrothermal fluids coming up and filling those voids and then solidifying out. And of course the minerals drop out of solution, and especially if they're boiling or the pH balance changes or temperature and pressure changes. So anyway, that's the way the gold is forming here, and it's an electrum. It's 30% silver, if not more. That's why when William Bodie first found it, he's like, hey, this gold looks kind of white. Well, that's because it's got silver in it. Over here by the north end of the park, you can see where they found it. It was just north of the cemetery in Pearson Spring. Another thing I got to point out is Bodie had its own railroad, believe it or not. How do you think they got all this stuff in here? It's called the Bodie-Benton line. Now, it never did make it to Benton, but they did use it. It was a 32-mile line. It's at the very top of this hill. Of course, they won't let you up there. What they use it for? Well, they had to haul in machinery, mostly lumber, and of course cords of wood, because everything up here was steam powered until they got the electric plant going. But they had their own railroad, and you don't hear a lot about that either. But it is a beautiful town, huh? You imagine staying up here at night? I bet you there's all kinds of ghosts living up here.
Probably no district in the history of mining possesses such a singularly interesting and perfect formation, one which is certain to induce capital, industry, and intelligence to go to extreme lengths in the cause of development. Signed, Professor Ben Silliman.
The Bodie Formation extended some 10,400 feet along the top of the ridge and was nearly 3/4 of a mile wide. To get to it would require hard work. Bodie deposits were left to men with a liking for brutal work and a harsh existence.
We are continually annoyed by young men writing from Atlantic states requesting we use our influence in securing them a clerkship, something nice, clean, and easy. Let this answer suffice for all. If you can whack a 16-bull team, hit a drill, engineer a wheelbarrow, or deal faro, and shoot with some degree of accuracy, then we advise you to come right along. Otherwise, stay where you are as an ornament in a New York dry goods store. Bodie Standard News, September 1879.
One theory, called the Veta Madre, held that all the gold veins would descend into one deep, gigantic central mother vein of incalculable worth. Plainly on the mind of every miner as he started his 12-hour shift was that tantalizing prospect. And so the mines went deeper.
This thing of being dropped down into the bowels of the earth in wooden buckets may be very amusing to read about, but I've enjoyed pleasanter modes of locomotion. There was one shaft which left an indelible impression upon my mind. It was about 4 feet square, rough, black, and dismal, with a small flickering light, apparently 1,000 feet below, making the darkness visible. Down I crept, rung after rung, ladder after ladder, in the black darkness, with the solid walls of rock pressing the air close around me. With a desperate effort I proceeded, clinging to the frail woodwork as a drowning man clings to a straw, gasping for breath. There was an oppressive sensation in being so completely isolated, barred out, as it were, from the surface of the earth. Yet how many there are who spend half their lives in such places for a pittance of the wages which they squander in dissipation? Surely it is worth $4 a day to work in these dismal holes. Signed, J. Ross Brown.
Mining law said that any tunnel which struck a blind ledge of gold could be claimed by that company. Many a tunnel was watched with bated breath as the miners advanced. Each outfit pressed forward with everything they had. Miners felt duty-bound to push things to the limit. In the search for things precious, men were willing to take chances. Buried hundreds of feet deep under the mountains, a miner never knew at what bend he might come face to face with death. Even if he escaped a crippling accident, he still faced the possibility of contracting pneumonia or silicosis from breathing in the rock dust. The mine owners cared little about developing safety measures. Their object was to extract the ore as quickly and cheaply as possible. And even at $4 a day, labor was cheap. With inadequate brakes and incompetent operators, many a miner lost his life in buckets or cages, free-falling 200, 400, and even 700 feet to the bottom of mine shafts. As the mines grew more complex, miners faced the added challenge of dodging a maze of open holes. More than a few slipped on ice and fell into them, or simply forgot and stepped back into empty space. And that was the last anybody saw of them alive. Water was a constant threat. Giant pumps worked night and day to pump it out. And where flooding wasn't a problem, bad air could be. But the most feared hazard wasn't water, bad air, or cave-ins. The miners' greatest fear was fire, and worse. It happened the evening of July 8, 1879. 2 tons of giant powder exploded at the old Standard Works on the hill. 7 men were dead, several of which, it was reported, were vaporized. The shock wave was felt 20 miles away in Bridgeport. Though miners suffered through the death and mutilation, they had one ally. The Bodie Miners Union was constructed. The Miners Union eventually negotiated better working conditions for the miners, but never higher wages. A miner never forgot that while he earned his $4, rich men in New York and San Francisco were growing richer.
I think I'll go in here to the Miners Union Hall. I've got a complaint. Actually, it's a museum. Look at this. See that? Wow. That is cool. Insulators. Steel pots. Ooh, roller skates. Family album. Oh, that is so cool. Scales. See the scales back there? Oh, you don't want to see what that is. Oh, there's a miner's land right there. The old carbide lantern, see that? Ooh, look at that, the old photography, painting up there. You know that they had all kinds of stuff going on in here. Ooh, you don't want to see that. I know. Wow, all kinds of neat stuff. Ooh, look at that. That's what you want to look at. Rock samples. There's the wall rock, tough. There's cupels. Oh, there's some safety fuse. You see that? Crucibles. Ooh. There's some of the material out here. Look at that. Of course, there's a town back in the day. Yeah. I want you to take a look. Fully stocked. Miners' lanterns. That's right. Coffee grinders. See that? Ooh. You don't see this stuff anymore. Oh, that was for women's clothing right there. You see that? There you go. Fully stocked store. Ooh. All right, now another neat feature about Bodie. Take a look at this.
This firehouse was rebuilt in the 1930s by the California.
Look at this. Okay, I want to show you this house right here. All right, now, the last people to live here in Bodie were staying here, in this house. Ooh, you imagine living here? Ooh, look at all these beautiful houses over here. Look at that. Isn't that nice?
You remember the 49ers? The gold seekers? They came on anything that had wheels. And if they didn't have wheels, they came anyway. The gold seekers of 1849. Towns grew up quickly around the mines. Big towns, some of them. A little rough and ready, but not as much as you would probably think. Then when the mines were played out, or when the government lowered the price on gold, the people pulled out and left the derelict towns behind them. The ghost towns. A ghost town always had a kind of fascination for me. This one is 8,400 feet up in the mountains, just east of the high Sierras, near the Nevada line. Name? Bodie, California. Born around 1856. Died? Question mark. It was started by a man named Bodie, who took a look at those hills and decided they contained a lot of gold. He was right, too. Though not being a prospector, I can't say the hills impressed me very much when I saw them. Bodie had a placer claim on all this territory, which means he panned the stuff by hand. He took out $500, though it's doubtful if he got to spend much of it, because he broke his leg while he was hiking after supplies. And by the time they found him, which was after the snows had thawed, well, Bodie took out $500, and in the town they named after him, they took out 80 million more. This is the main street of Bodie. It used to be 2 miles long from stem to stern, with a racetrack at one end and Chinatown at the other. It's considerably shorter now. Considerably. The fires have done that. Like all mining towns, Bodie has had a lot of fires. The fire bell there is about the most important single piece of equipment they had. It's still shiny and new looking. Maybe that's because of the workout it got. The firehouse is standing on the site of the last big fire. Started by a little boy, 3.5 years old, who wanted to have some fun with a box of matches he found. The fire burned out almost all of Bodie's business district, burned down the Occidental Hotel and a lot of stores. That's the machine they used to fight the fires. I was able to look in some of the houses, the ones with sides missing, because of the weight of the snows or because of the fires. But the houses that were still intact, they were all locked. They had furniture inside and curtains on the windows. They looked as if they were waiting, but I didn't have a ghost of an idea what for. I had thought the town was deserted, and then I saw this little gnome-like fellow. I won't say I thought he was one of the ghosts, though he certainly did blend into the scenery. He turned out to be the caretaker. The caretaker told me a lot about Bodie's history. That mine was the old Standard, the only one left of the 17 operating during the town's heyday. The smaller building is a cyanide mill. Cyanide process for removing gold is old stuff now, but that was the first cyanide mill of the country. Bodie had the first electric line, too, or the longest. The first or the longest, I forget which it was now. Maybe both. It struck out from the Standard Mine straight across those hills, and it didn't have a bend in it. The caretaker said they were afraid the electricity would jump the track if the line curved. Another thing, they used square wire. Why square? Oh, he guessed they just figured they could cram more juice into a square wire than a round one. The power's been turned off in Bodie for years. The sawmill there operated from a gasoline engine. But they haven't had any gas in Bodie for a long time either. That was one of the last automobiles that had any call for it. That'll give you an idea. The man who ran the filling station had the butcher shop across the street. All the stores in Bodie were independently owned, not like a lot of mining towns. That's the general store. The scales on the counter weren't for groceries, though. They used them to weigh the gold. And it was a real general store. The caretaker said the miners and their bosses got on very well, all things considered. Never was a strike. They shortened the hours from 12 to 10. Then again from 10 to 8. No trouble about it, though. They didn't have any mining disasters in Bodie either. No cave-ins or anything like that. I asked him about the cemetery. There didn't seem to be many graves, but he said a lot of them had been erased by the snows and by time. The thing that impressed me was how many children were there. In the graveyard of a ghost town, you'd expect to find old people buried. That little girl was only 3. She was killed by an Indian who was swinging a pick. It was an accident. The angel is pointing to the place where the pick went in. Funerals would wind up that hill. They were big occasions. There was a tall black hearse with 4 black plumes, and the whole town would turn out to follow it up the hill. Procession would start on Main Street at that little building. That's the morgue. Used to be a photographer studio, but he went out of business. The undertaker didn't. You see a lot of safes in Bodie. A lot of vaults, too. Those vaults were the strongest buildings in town. You think they kept the gold there? So did I. No, that's where they kept the liquor. I think they had a high regard for spirits. One fellow kept his, appropriately enough, in a hollow tombstone up in the graveyard. You see where the back has fallen off? Held 6 quarts. I really don't know what I expected to see when I came to Bodie. Just a lot of old houses, I suppose. Well, Bodie had 'em. Some were standing, but leaning. Some were leaning a little bit more. And some had given up altogether, like the blacksmith shop there. No, I really can't say what I expected to find in a ghost town, but certainly not people. There is a population, though. 9, counting the kids. The caretaker told me the Bells lived in that house, so I called on Mrs. Bell. A little lady in a faded blue dress. Didn't want to smile because she had a missing tooth. Mrs. Bell, I said, I understand you're the only lady in Bodie. That's right, she said. I'm the Belle of Bodie. Well then, Mrs. Bell, I asked, I wonder if you can tell me something about the town. She wouldn't do it, though. She said she was a newcomer. Only been there 20 years. She told me she would call her husband. He had been born there. Well, Mr. Bell knew all about Bodie, all right. I asked him about the locked houses. Seems the whole town is owned by a man named Kane. J.S. Kane, that is, not the old man. Old Vic Kane owned most of Bodie in his day. His son owns it now, what's left of it. But old Vic owned it when there were 12,000 people, when there were 17 mines, when they were hauling gold out of the mountains every day. Old Vic came from Canada way with nothing in his pockets but his hands. But before long, he'd gotten hold of the bank. That's the bank. In a card game, they say, but they always say something like that about any successful man. You know that. But before he was through, he had bought up the Standard Mine and practically anything else in town worth buying. They say he was controlled by some San Francisco millionaires. But as far as the people in Bodie were concerned, old Vic was the man. They made him the mayor. That's his house. The only mayor the town ever had. Those were pretty rough days. I understand they used to have some real bad men, Mr. Bell. I'd heard stories about the bad men from Bodie. That jail might look like it's coming apart at the seams, but the cells are still plenty strong. They had to be. These bad men weren't the real citizens of Bodie, just a bunch of freebooters who drifted in from Virginia City and Aurora following the gold smell. They used to average 3 killings a day. Always had a good supply of tombstones handy. That block of granite was a tombstone, too, in a way. Used to have a ceremony where they would lay a wreath on the block after a big fire and say, "Bodie is dead, Bodie is buried." They buried it 3 times, but the town wouldn't stay dead. Not as long as there was gold. Besides the Bells, there's another family in town, the Biggses. They account for the total population of 9, counting the kids. Mr. Biggs is a diamond drill man. He sets the diamonds in the bit himself. He told me that bit will go through anything, and I guess he's right. He has himself a claim on the other side of the mountain. First day they started drilling, they found a rattlesnake. So they're going to call it the Rattlesnake Mine. If you hear about a big strike east of the Sierras at the Rattlesnake Mine, that's the man. That was the answer, of course. That's why all the houses are locked. They're waiting for something like that. Waiting to be moved into when there's another big strike. Bodie is waiting to be a town again, to fill in the gaps left by the fires, to come alive. Funny thing about this town, you don't see any animals. No dogs, no cats. Even the bird houses are deserted. Maybe that's why it's so quiet. You can hear your footsteps following you. I looked in at the church. That's one of the few buildings that isn't locked. That and the jail. Church is in pretty good shape. Few boards pulled loose in the roof, but it's still pretty sound. And you can read the 10 Commandments without any trouble. Well, that's the town. Population has dropped considerably from the 12,000 they used to have, but they say it will come back. They all believe that. I believed it too when I talked to them. Bodie, California. No dogs, no cats, no modern conveniences. Population, 9.
See that? How you got a modern stovepipe on there? Isn't that sharp? Wow, this is really nice. See, you go back in time. Oh, and look at this. Come here. You know what this is? This is the heart right here. This is where they would saw the wood. See that? You got to have a sawmill. You got to cut that wood. Because they had a fire here, remember? So they had to rebuild the town. So this thing was going nonstop. Look at that. There's a forge over there. Ooh, there's another house over here. Let's take a look. Now you can see that. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Ooh, I don't want to open that. That one's open. Oh, there's somebody living in there. There's a kitty door. They got cats everywhere that live out here. That's got a nice roof on it, too. Wow. Oh, let's see what that is. Ain't got time to walk. Another outhouse. Ooh. Look at all those cool buildings, huh? Oh, there's another one. Oh, and there's the church. You see the church? Now that is a church. Man, that's something else. Beautiful looking organ in there too. Okay, let's take a look at this. And a site everywhere out here. I hate that. Let's take a look. Ooh, what's in there? Do I see a ghost? I don't see a ghost. Look at that. Look at that. Just the way they left it. Isn't that beautiful? Okay. There's another house. There's another house. Ooh, these buildings are falling. You need to go to the bathroom? Because I got outhouses everywhere. Look at this. Yes. Johnson, give me my coffee. As I come up with a new budget. Look at these houses. Beautiful. Ooh, this one's open. This one's open. Oh, there's a back door on this one. See that? Man, they did a good job. They did a really good job. I know it. Ooh, that's a barn falling down. There's another one over here. Beautiful wallpaper. You see that? That's an ore cart. Look at that guy. See that guy right there? Yeah. There's a wagon right there. Oh, there's a skip car. See the skip car right there? There's a skip car. See that? Big old honking wheels. Honka, honka, honka. Look at that. Look at this wagon right here. That's a heck of a wagon, huh? Right out behind me here, and in this area over here, you see that? You got Pearson Spring at the very top, and then you've got this draw right here. This is the area where William Bodie was first camping out. And there's a spring over here, and this is where he was at when he started sampling the area, and he found gold. And of course, you can see that they followed it down and up there across onto the hill, and that's why they started mining there. But Pearson Spring is right up over there. That's where they were camped out originally, but they had stopped here along this draw, and they were camping out, and they found that gold, that electrum. So anyway, we're gonna head up to the cemetery real quick because I got another story. This is Evelyn, and she was just a child when she died. The reason why she's pointing to the top of her head is because that's where she was struck by a miner's pick when two miners had a disagreement and they were fighting, and she just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so they buried her here. She was only 3 years old. I thought you might want to see this. Now, another thing I gotta tell you is not far from here is another cemetery, but it's unmarked. And why? That's right. It's for the women of ill repute. They didn't want to bury him in this cemetery, so they buried him outside the cemetery because they figured that they weren't good enough for this cemetery. I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing all this, and I hope you've enjoyed today's little episode out here at Bodie. And if you enjoyed today's episode, well, you know what to do. I don't need to tell you. So anyway, till next time, this is Jeff Williams. And Slim, I know he's around here somewhere, say, you like old ghost towns? Well, we do too. Hang out with us, and you'll see more than a few. Take care, everybody.